Arab leaders are meeting this weekend in Egypt to discuss plans to create a joint multinational Arab military force in order to combat the dire situation taking storm throughout the Middle East. The push to stabilize the region could be seen as a sign of a new determination among major powers, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, along with their allies to intervene against any threat to the region, whether it's extremist groups or even Iran's growing influence. The talks come just days after the start of Saudi Arabia's airstrike campaign in Yemen, where Shia rebels backed by Iran have taken over the country. And now they're threatening the borders of Saudi Arabia. So Jose, this will change things greatly, not just for what's happening now, but for the future. We're seeing a multinational campaign of all the strongest Muslim countries. They're coming together and they're not fighting one cause. We're not talking about ISIS, we're not talking about Al-Qaeda, we're not talking about this or that, which are all things that are destabilizing the region, but they're coming together to respond quickly because we know that the Arab League works much differently. They need something that's going to allow them to strike with military force quickly when they need it, like we saw with Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about all of them backing each other to stop things, like the growth of terrorism, like the growth of Iran's influence and fighting proxy wars in other countries.
How much is this a reaction from a mild involvement of the U.S. facing the latest threat that is ISIS?
Right.
And it's kind of like taking a backseat approach where it's letting the regional countries take. So I think it's a good step that the countries that are closely involved in the situation are the ones in charge of responding and deciding what is the correct military approach to be taking place in the region.
Right.
And another thing that is important to note is that the military alliance is really positive, but also we need to talk about something that is another big issue in the region, that is sectarian violence. I think the different countries in the Middle East, they need to listen to the activists that are asking to start a dialogue between these multinational ethnic groups, because we have different ethnic groups that are overlapping different countries. And that they're fighting in between them. So the voices in the Middle East asking for a real dialogue in between the different ethnic groups so we end the sectarian violence is something that needs to be happening alongside this military alliance.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because what sparked this whole conversation between these major countries was in fact the situation in Yemen, right? Where we're seeing different sectarian groups causing sectarian violence in a country where Iran is backing the Houthi rebels, which have completely overtaken the government. The president's now in Riyadh. He can't even be in Sana'a anymore. So it's like, it's a question of, we see so much sectarian violence being purposely brought on in the Middle East by countries backed by countries like Iran, and now they're coming together and they're stopping that. And it kind of raises the question, how will this play out in the future for the Middle East? Do you think that it could have long-term effects for the positive? Because for once, we're seeing a lot more unity than before. And you mentioned, which was a very good point, he mentioned the fact that is this, a product of less American involvement? This wouldn't have happened in the early 2000s and the 90s, because we had our butts all in there everywhere. People hated us at that point. Still do, but are more reluctant to start wars in the Middle East, in Syria, for example, gives rise to these kinds of things. And that's why I get so pissed off when I see certain Republicans coming out and saying, we need to strike Iran right now, we need to bomb them, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this, but only good things have been coming so far, in my opinion, from waiting. And yes, a lot of people have died. People would have died either way, but it's like we're playing a different card now. Instead of being world police, we're trying to mediate things, we're trying to negotiate, we're taking things in a different way, and Republicans can't really switch over to that.
To that dialogue.
And that kind of dialogue gives rise to things like this, and what we're trying to do ultimately is stabilize the Middle East, are we not?
And the reality is that also the power geography in the region has changed a lot. We see Egypt with a really strong presence, we see Saudi Arabia making a strong front against Iran, increasing power in the region. So also, I guess the U.S. is trying to play along with its allies in the region and let them do the work. We are seeing in Iraq the battle almost completed to take over Tikrit with involvement of Iran. So it's a very complex thing, but the positive light is that the regional governments are taking the lead on deciding the military actions to be taking place in the region.
And it allows the region to unite and kind of decide their own future. And it stops countries like US coming in and meddling when they simply probably shouldn't be, right? It'll stop things like that.
Some people will think differently.
Of course they would, but that's one very important thing to be taken here. And we really want to know what you guys have to say about all this and what it could lead to in the future, where it could go possibly. Let us know by commenting. And of course, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the Lip TV for more.